Today, we will be talking with Rob Hopkins, the co-founder of Transition Town Totnes and the International Transition Network. We'll be listening to what Rob has to say about this rapidly growing movement that he has been involved with over the past few years. Rob is joining with us via video conference over the internet. So Rob, let's get started. Let's start by talking about transition towns. Tell me, what is a transition town?
Well, first thing to say is we don't really use the term transition towns so much anymore, because what we're looking at now is transition cities, transition villages, islands, hamlets, universities, boroughs, districts. So we use the term transition initiative more, that captures the diversity and the depth of what's actually happening. But really what we talk about in a transition initiative is the place where a group of people who are motivated to do so have come together to look at the question of how is this community going to weather peak oil and climate change? Is it going to be a community which just puts its head in the sand and hopes the problem's going to go away? Or is it going to look these challenges square in the face and respond with creativity and compassion and imagination? So really it starts with a few people, and what they're doing is initiating a process that we've kind of mapped out, which goes through awareness raising to bringing people together to look at different aspects of this, exploring what a response looks like if, rather than being driven by a sort of guilt and a ecological gloom and doom, what actually drives it is engaged optimism. That people feel that they want to make something happen, and they feel this is a historic time to do it. It's basically a process which is about looking at the practicalities of relocalization, about looking at the things that can be done locally, and seeing peak oil and climate change not as a disastrous end of everything, but as an opportunity for some brilliant thinking, and as an opportunity for entrepreneurship, creativity, and that's what we're starting to see around the world in hundreds, thousands of places now.
So this is really more of a local focus then. It's problem solving locally?
It's problem solving locally, but networked globally. If we were the only transition initiative in the whole world, there wouldn't really be that much to be gained from that. But the fact is that what we've created is an international network of communities who are doing this work, sharing their successes, sharing their failures, swapping stories and tips and so on. Communities become more self-reliant, not self-sufficient, but they become more able to kind of meet their own needs, but in doing so are sharing that globally with other communities doing the same thing.
Okay, I get it. So as these communities start to work on the issues, what are some of the issues that they need to resolve, Rob?
Well, I think the main one at this point in time is our chronic addiction to hydrocarbons, in particularly to liquid fuels. We use globally about 86 million barrels of oil every day. Obviously has huge impacts in terms of climate change, but also we're entering a period of time which people refer to as the end of the age of cheap oil. There are very few people around now who are saying that in 5 years' time we're going to go back to having cheap oil prices again. And cheap oil has made so much possible for us. And we argue that actually for the West in particular, to detox, to break that connection to its oil addiction is really important. So that's not just a question of transportation, it's a question of the fact that cheap oil underpins every aspect of our life, our food, education, but the way we build, and so on. So, and we argue that when you look at peak oil and climate change and you overlap those two things, then you have a space in the middle which is most important. It's not enough just to look at climate change on its own from a technological perspective, not enough just to look at peak oil on its own, as in we just need to get cheap liquid fuels from wherever we can find them. That bit in the middle is really about planning for the future, because this isn't going to come around serendipitously by accident. It's a collective design project, powering down in terms of reducing the amount of energy that we consume, and powering up in terms of putting in place the renewable energy infrastructure that we're going to need.
Okay, so if we accept the notion then that cheap oil is gone for good, give me some examples then about how the transition initiatives would actually work at a local level.
Well, this process usually starts with a process of awareness raising and finding ways of communicating about peak oil, climate change, the economics, in a way that people feel very exhilarated by and invited to be a part of. It then moves on through forming groups of people who explore different aspects of this, what they're really passionate about. And then it works through a series of stages, building up to doing what we call an energy descent plan, which is a plan B for the community. And lots of practical projects would have started before then. So things like, lots of local food projects, local food directories, allotments, making gardens available for people to grow food in, planting productive trees throughout the town, maybe local currencies, energy efficiency stuff. But rather than how things often are, where in a town there'll be all kinds of different stuff going on, there'll be people doing intensive food gardening over here, there'll be people over here doing low energy bulbs and renewables and stuff. Transition tries to offer us sort of an umbrella that brings all of those things together, looking at the question, how is this community going to work when oil costs $200 a barrel? Here in Totnes, for example, we're just about a month away now from publishing the Energy Descent Plan here, which is the first one that's ever been done, really, I think. And now we're looking beyond that in terms of how are we going to actually make that happen. So we're really starting to look at social enterprise, social entrepreneurship as being one of the key drivers. How do we create livelihoods from this? Because for me, that feels like that's when it really becomes meaningful, when we become a meaningful employer in the community and more people have a stake in this process.
So this can actually be a good thing for local jobs in the local economy?
Well, we don't really have much choice, I would argue. I mean, like, if we don't do anything, the results of inaction on a climate perspective are ghastly, and the results from a peak oil perspective are that we find ourselves in a crisis for which we're totally unprepared. And one of the key sort of strands in transition is this idea of resilience. How do we enable our communities to be able to withstand shock from the outside? And I think it's as important a concept as sustainability. Sustainability implies that we're trying to build up to a kind of a steady state where we can just carry on a lower level of consumption, but carry on indefinitely. Resilience is a more useful concept because we're entering times of increasing uncertainty, whether it's through oil price spikes or shortages or climate-related events. And so we can either choose to look at that as a disaster, or we can look at it as an opportunity. For humanity to get to the top of the energy of the peak oil peak in the first place took the most extraordinary creativity and ingenuity and brilliance to do that. So why is that all going to evaporate when we have to design a way down the other side?
So you're saying that the human race is very resilient, we're very ingenious. We will solve this.
We will solve this if we ask the right questions. If the question that we ask is how are we going to sustain economic growth at the rate that we've had for the last 10, 20 years, how are we going to replace all of the energy that we currently use magically with some other source of cheap energy, how are we going to keep a globalized distribution system going, then we're asking the wrong questions. And the results of clinging to those things, I think, would be really disastrous. If the questions that we ask are how are we going to live on much, much less energy, cut our consumption by about half, reduce our emissions by 80, 90%, rebuild our local economies so that things that we can produce locally, we produce locally, then we're asking the right questions. And then we can move forward in such a way that yes, I think we can do that.
Now, you mentioned a few moments ago that transition initiatives are both local and international at the same time. What did you mean by that in a practical sense?
In Devon, in Totnes, we have a transition initiative which is looking at Totnes and its surrounding district and looking at what the relocalization of that might look like, what the new businesses that we need might look like, how this process is going to work. But we aren't doing it in isolation. This isn't about building a huge, great big fence all around Totnes and you can only get in or out with a passport. It's not about self-sufficiency. It's about increasing local self-reliance and resilience. The things that we develop here, the projects that we try, we then disseminate. We make that information available through the Transition Network to communities around the world. And it's a backwards and forwards process, so we feel very much part of the world and connected to the world. But at the same time, there's no reason why, just because you're connected to the world, the UK should be exporting 150 million kilos of potatoes to Germany and importing the same amount back again. Maybe we just email each other recipes for potato cakes instead.